Hey, Rabbi Saroken, how are you?
Back.
Thank you. Jeremy behind the glass today, as always,
Hi.
calmly steering the ship, or at least steering the ship, or the studio, as it were.
We came back into a storm.
You know, in the city, there's no ice at all.
Come on.
None. Was saying to Jeremy, none in the city. I was surprised when I came up the ramp. There was ice everywhere. Yeah.
You know, Maya got her driver's license this week.
Ah, mazel
Remember when
tov.
she was born, you used to change her diapers.
I did.
So
That's
she
true,
is officially
actually.
driving.
Wow, that's big
And
news.
It was big news. She loves it. And sending her out into the world with like sleet today, and ice, it felt really scary, but she's so determined to
Yeah.
drive. You know, it's like
The roads seem fine, so it's.
Yeah.
I think you're okay with that.
It's good for her.
it is. And Jonathan Haidt, have you been reading Jonathan Haidt? H-A-I-D-T.
Yeah.
He wrote The Coddling of the American Mind. He also wrote The Anxious Generation. I think The Coddling American Mind just came out as a movie, like that you can get online. But anyway, he's
Right.
sort of like one of his things is like, let your children be free. So I was like, let me be free.
Out
into the world.
I remember getting my driver's license. Doesn't seem like so long ago.
I know. Although nowadays, like you remember when we were getting it, you got to drive out into the world with someone in your car. Nowadays they have like like it's in the parking lot and you sort of drive around. Although she did leave the parking lot.
Oh, for the test. Yeah.
Yeah.
For the test.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't even remember in Binghamton where you went to get your driver's license.
And we went to White Plains. But I will have you know that parallel parking is one of my absolute best skills. I don't even know if you know that about me.
No.
I feel like you should know.
Me
that
too,
about
actually. I'm a very good parallel
I really
parker.
like it. And I really pride myself on it. Mostly I don't need to adjust. I just back in and like occasional rage. Not much. It just works out.
That's good.
We'll update your bios on the website.
I know. If you could.
It's funny that you took your driver's test in White Plains, like traffic.
Yeah.
You know, and I was talking to my dad about, I don't even know how it came up, but someone was talking to us and came up Binghamton and like trying to get somewhere at a certain time, and the person said, but you have to deal with traffic. My dad said, there's no traffic in Binghamton, and there was no such thing. There literally is no such thing as traffic. It doesn't even exist there.
It's so funny when I was working for Up With People at the beginning of my career. I was staying with a family in a place called Dinosaur
Gulch.
I don't know if it was like Utah or Colorado. It was like right on the cusp. And I was like, what time do we need to wake up in the morning to be at the gathering place? And they were like, well, there's going to be a lot of traffic. And I mean, this was like a town that you probably, knew not only everybody, but about everybody. And I was like, okay. So we woke up early, we got in the car, and then we were we were coming to pull out, and there were two cars that went by, and they were like, just see?
That was the traffic.
That was it. The two neighbors going somewhere.
Oh, yeah. Well, everything's relative, as they say.
That's so true.
Everything's relative.
So talking about like sort of hurrying out into a world that's crazy.
Yeah.
The Torah portion that we're into this week is Beshalach.
Beshalach.
And it's an interesting thing because last week we left everybody with Pharaoh finally saying like, go, get out, all of you. And Moses was able to take the people, sort of to leave Egypt. And then they got to, sort of the sea. And all of a sudden, Pharaoh, as it turns out, sort of, I don't know like what happens, but he like realizes he's just lost his workforce. And he's like, wait, changed his mind and went and, they pursued, his army pursued the Jewish people or the Israelites.
Right.
So what do you think happened? Let's start there. Like, why do you think Pharaoh said go, and then all of a sudden it was like, wait, no, and then go get him, bring him back?
Yeah, a number of different takes I would have on that, but one would be that so if part of what's going on is that there's this contest between God and Pharaoh, essentially, which I do think is kind of a subtext of the narrative, then you want to sort of, in a dramatic, literary sense, have this final moment where God completely crushes Pharaoh. And
Huh.
I think that's created by drawing Pharaoh out, his army, which is a symbol of his might, getting them to a vulnerable place, bringing them sort of
Hmm.
into the sea, and then just completely destroying them.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Um, that part that you just said, sort of bringing them out of their sort of headquarters and bringing them out into the
Right.
street, and then what ends up happening is that you sort of have these two things happening simultaneously, which is that the Bnei Israel has to sort of figure out, what do we do? Like, they're looking this way and there's the water, and behind them are their pursuers,
Right.
Egyptians, and they have to figure out what to do. And it's an interesting thing because they end up sort of going into the water, which then parts. And we see this moment for Moses, right? Where he's like, help, and God's like, why are you talking to me? Now's the time for
Yeah.
action.
Yeah.
How do you make sense of these pieces, both like the courage and, whose plan was it? Just like, let's walk into the water and see what happens.
Well, to me, that's such a great kind of Jewish moment, which is like, it's the old idea, like, okay, say a prayer, but do it yourself.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
And I that kind of symbolizes God is, listen, you guys try to take care of it yourselves. Like,
Hmm.
I don't know if God's busy or whatever, but God's matitzake, what, don't daber el bnei Israel v'yisa'u, tell
Yeah.
them to go, like you.
Yep.
And then the great midrashic tradition. But I do see that of, sort of symbolic of this Jewish idea that you don't put your eggs all in that basket. It's not about, say prayers, sure, that's great, but take care of it yourself. Like, do it yourself. Take care of yourself, of people, of your own destiny to the best of your ability.
It's an interesting thing. I don't know if you do this in prayer. I'm actually curious about it, but I feel like my prayer life has evolved to a place of like option A and option B. And so option A for me is like asking God to take care of it. Like, bring on the miracle, cure my friend with cancer, you know, bring cognitive, clarity back to, our beloved congregant with Alzheimer's or dementia, right? Like, stop the spread of whatever, that's all like option A. Like, that's what we want God to do. That's like our miracle ask. And then option B in my prayer tends to be like, and if that's not your will, give. And then I ask God for like the strength, the courage, the faith for me, for someone else, right? So it's sort of
Right.
like that idea of like looking up and looking up, but also looking in. Like, what do you need in order, like, if that miracle doesn't come, what do you need in order to endure or to help someone else to endure?
Yeah, that's nice. I mean, I would say not if it's when the miracle doesn't come,
Oh, come on.
right?
No, miracles happen.
Yeah, well,
Miracles.
irregularly, to say the least. And that's that moment. Like, that's when they need the miracle. And so you could say, well, a miracle does happen, like the water's open and everything. But the implication of the text is that it had to be human action. That
Mhm.
so I guess to your point, that kind of way. It's the great midrashic tradition, though. It really emphasizes that idea that it's the human action that makes the difference, with the whole thing about Nachshon and wading into the
Yeah.
water, and not till he gets up to his neck, and finally, so that's that, again, to your, like, of human courage and strength and faith and all those kinds of things that you need to get through the difficult moments.
And then you get through, and I would say that there's like a couple other parts in this Torah portion as people are hopefully reading along with us as we go. But the next part is, the sort of like the moments of the sea, right? Which is the Bnei Israel goes through a parted sea. The Egyptians follow suit, and the waters close up over them. They're destroyed. They've been stopped and they die in the water, and then Bnei Israel continues on. When they get to the other side in safety, they turn around, they see what's happened, they see that their pursuers have sunk in the sea, and they sing out.
Right.
And Moses first starts a song, and then Miriam starts a song, and she sings with the women. And there's sort of this, like, there's a midrash that says that that God gave them like a bit of tochacha, a rebuke, saying, basically, like, they were also my children. Like, you shouldn't you shouldn't sing and rejoice, you know, when when others, even your enemies, are suffering.
Right.
And I feel like that's like it's an interesting thing right now in our world. I feel like um, it's an important lesson to know, and I think that that's one of the reasons that it makes during this war even
Right.
it makes it so important for us to like hold on to like our own values and God's rebuke to say like you know thank God those enemies are no longer going to endanger you, but also like there's a difference between being relieved and rejoicing. And also, I think it's partly why some of the celebrations around the world, um, as Jews are suffering, feel really bad too.
Sure. Yeah, of course. Of course. Powerful idea. I mean, it's another kind of undercurrent in Jewish thought is this idea of not rejoicing over the suffering of enemies. And, you even have the verse, I can't remember where it is, it might be in Numbers. You should not abhor, not hate an Egyptian in your heart. It's just interesting that there's this sort of kind recurrent refrain of the idea that folks, even if they are your enemies, at the end of the day, they're beings, and you shouldn't lose sight of that.
So let's talk for a minute about enemies. I find that since October 7th, my prayers have been different, especially in the Amidah, when there's actually a section about, you know, take the hope away from my enemies, right? Those who are trying to
Right.
to do evil to me, right? Like thwart their plans and basically crush the arrogant, right? Like there's sort of this very aggressive paragraph.
Right.
And I don't know about you, but like I've always felt like I don't, as far as I'm aware, I don't really have many enemies, in the world. And then on October 8th, I was like, as it turns out, I do. you know, how does this whole, sort of concept of enemies that I think this Torah portion, sort of raises up, how has that evolved for you in the last, 485 days?
I mean, it really hasn't changed, honestly. First of all, because theologically, I don't see God working that way. So I don't think God's going to do this or do that. You know, so that's already a shift right there. Um, but I think the challenge and ongoing for all of us is to remember at the end of the day what are the values, what are the morals that we're proud of as Jews. When we say all the time, we're like Jewish community is defined by high moral compass and values that are X, Y, and Z. I mean, we talk about that all the time. Well, can you do it when it's tough?
Mm,
Or can you only do it when it's easy? So I mean, to me, that hasn't changed.
mm, okay. Let's move to the next area. You have the Bnei Israel, singing out with Moses, and I'll say singing out, but also like thanking God for the miracles that happened,
Yeah.
and then Miriam follows suit, and then we have in this Torah portion Bnei Israel like moving into the wilderness. And after this incredible miracle of the sea literally parting and all of the enemies that should have overpowered Bnei Israel being destroyed, you have all of a sudden they're out in the wilderness. God's already proven that God is with them, and all of a sudden they are like they're kvetching, right? There's sort of this sense
Doesn't
of
take
like,
long. Right.
why did you do this to us, Moses? Like,
Right.
why did you bring us out here? Didn't they have graves in Egypt that we could have died there?
Right.
Like, I mean,
No, this is like a constant refrain in some of our
Mhm.
conversations that I feel bad for Moses. Poor
oh,
Moses.
this is the Moses part again.
Yeah, the poor guy. Like he gets him out, and he's schlepping, and then he's and again he didn't want to do it in the first place. He's like, oh God, and it's just one challenge after another challenge after another challenge. But also I think that there's this whole sense of how hard it is to be grateful for things.
Mm.
And even with it's so easy to think about the hard things, and in the midst of that, to forget about how lucky you are in so many other ways, and the Israelites just like they just literally is it at the end of this
Yeah.
Sedra that they start kvetching? Yeah. So literally, like the sea thing happens, they're free, da 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 da, and then they're like, I don't like the accommodations here, It's really
It's so true. And it's also interesting, right, to see some like human tendencies in this like final piece,
Sure.
right? Like you get out there and, there's sort of this question of like, by the way, not only do I not like the accommodations, I also don't like the food. Like the food's not good
well, it's
out
Jewish,
here.
so it has to be about food.
So they get there and they're grumbling, right? So they're upset about the food. It used to be better. And then God says, I've heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Speak to them and tell them by the evening they'll eat flesh, right? They'll have meat. And in the morning you'll have your fill of bread. And then the quail comes and it covers the earth or the encampment. And the dew comes, and basically we know that, like, the Midrash tells us that the manna, right, like it could taste like anything they wanted.
Right.
I sort of imagine it like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
Yeah. Or Star Trek. The Star Trek thing about that too. Yeah.
Is that right? So basically the rule was like, take as much as you need, but don't take leftovers. Right. I'll provide for you. And then part of that is like building their trust in God.
Yeah.
Right? Like take what you need, but don't take love. And they can't like help it. There's like this sense of like fear, that there won't be enough. And so they start to take it. And so God does this whole thing where like it's like infested with maggots. And then like there's a question of like, can you really provide for us? And God's like, of course I can provide for them. And then basically they have so much meat, like so much that they start like throwing it up out of their nose, right? Like there's this sense of like
We've all been there. Sorry.
So it's sort of this moment where you feel like the people are testing God and Moses. Moses, as I know you have such sympathy for him, like Moses is like, what did I do to deserve this?
Right.
And God is like, why are you doubting me? I can do anything. Didn't I just show you?
Right. It's kind of a toxic triangle.
That should be the name of your book.
Toxic triangle. It's got a ring to it.
It's the name of this podcast.
Right? Uh-oh. Speak of the devil.
Fire drill.
I think they're testing.
Okay. But so God, Moses, and the Israelites, I mean, it's sort of like, I guess the toxicity is between God and the Israelites, and Moses tries to kind of help both sides navigate that, and to Moses' credit, I think he does that with a lot of skill, actually. But it's very, very difficult, and God just doesn't get it. God really seems to be very limited in terms of God's understanding of human beings, how human beings think, how human beings feel, all those kinds of things. So Moses and God gets angry, and so Moses has to figure out how to sort of, lubricate that and enable the relationship to continue to exist. Adjustments are made. God's presence is less immediate, right? All that kind of stuff. But Moses, very, sometimes very cleverly, sometimes I would argue somewhat let's say through manipulation, through manipulation, is able to do it, and Moses does it, but it ain't easy. It's tough.
It's so interesting though, because really Moses was chosen and put in the role of an intermediary between the people and God, and I think that to your always point, isn't an easy place to be.
No, because but I mean, think from both, like the people don't do what God wants.
Yep. And
God doesn't do what the people want. Really. Or at least that's how they see it. So it's tough. But Moses, without Moses, the whole thing certainly would have fallen apart. It was, his effort that enabled it to. And it's sort of interesting, like you kind of think at the beginning of the story, and you would say, what's Moses' task? What he's really called to do is to kind of get the Israelites out of Egypt. But at the end of the story, you might say, what was his task? And his task really was to kind of help the Israelites and God navigate that difficult relationship, and he does, and Moses does do it.
So I think we're down to our last minute and a half or so. According to Jeremy.
Tough. No nonsense.
Yes, by the way. Always.
So I feel like in this parsha, we are really just getting a taste of what is soon to be for Bnei Israel, for the people of Israel as they go through the wilderness. There's also, as we move along to the very end, they were initially complaining about the food. Then they start to get upset about the water. There's no water, and they start to quarrel with Moses and say, "Give us water." And then he's saying, "Why are you angry with me? Why don't you talk to God?" But the people needed water, and again they start to grumble. And then God says to Moses, take this rod and go and you strike the rock and water is going to come out of it and the people will drink it. And that's exactly what happens. And then you get to this really, I think, one of it's such a small but interesting thing where we realize that Amalek is coming and he's going to fight with Israel. And Moses says to Joshua, right? So you're talking a lot about Moses as the leader, but Joshua is going to almost be his apprentice,
right?
And eventually he's going to take over. And Moses says to Joshua, pick some men for us that are going to go and do battle with Amalek. And I'm going to stay on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand. And so Joshua does. He goes and he takes Aaron and Hur with him. And whenever Moses holds up his hands, Israel prevails. But when Moses puts down his hand, Amalek, the enemy, prevails. And Moses' hands are growing heavy. And so they try to put stones underneath them to prop them. And Aaron and Hur, so his brother and Hur, his nephew, are on each side holding up his hands. And I feel like that's such a powerful image. And also there's so much to be unpacked in that scene where you've got Moses and Joshua and Aaron and Hur all sort of working together, not in the same role, but with some important role in terms of
what's happening, the final product, so to speak. Yeah. What's your sense of that? How do you?
So, I'm thinking of these four important men. Moses is sort of the lead. Aaron, his brother, is sort of his primary support through the wilderness.
Right.
In some ways, he comes and he goes, but I feel like God said to Moses early on, he's going to be there to help you. Don't feel like you have to do it alone.
Right.
He'll be your spokesperson when you need. He'll ultimately fill these other roles too. We soon learn. But then it's the idea of, so we know it's Moses and Aaron, but then when you add Joshua and Hur, it's an interesting thing. Joshua's going to be the one who's going to apprentice and eventually take over, unbeknownst to them just yet.
Right.
And Hur's a nephew. We don't really know so much about him.
No. I wonder if there's probably midrashic material on. I would guess. I don't know it, but I would guess that there would be.
What does it mean to hold up someone's arms?
Right.
Right. What is it like? You sort of have this sense that not only is it helpful, but it's crucial.
Yeah. You can't do it alone and all that.
Yeah. Is there some lesson we're supposed to take from that scene, if you will? Aaron and Hur, on each side, supporting.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that that you can't do it alone. Moses needs help and all that kind of business. I think also that there's the dynamic. I don't know the language, but I think it says that the Israelites were able to see it, right? So like when the staff went up, the Israelites could see. Does it say anything about that? I just wonder if there's some, sense that you need to be able to feel that there's an outcome here that is hopeful, and to have, if you can see the staff go up. Maybe it doesn't. I know you're looking. Maybe it doesn't say that, but if you can see the staff go up, or that hope can come into the human heart, and when hope comes into the human heart, then you can do things that are very, very difficult. So,
Love that. You should put that
in my book, The Toxic
the
Triangle.
triangle.
The Toxic Triangle. Okay.
On
Rabbi
that note,
Saroken, a pleasure as always.
Such a pleasure.
Good to see you. Congratulations to Maya again.
Yeah.
And
Back.
Jeremy, thank you as always. Folks, we'll see you next week.